Hey everybody, welcome back to this live episode of Think Business. I'm looking forward to talking with Stormy Hill. Stormy, it's great to see you. I'm looking forward to today's talk because I always love talking about mindfulness, wellness, personal growth, and raising awareness. I'm a big believer that everything starts with an increased level of awareness. The same level of consciousness that gets us to where we are in this moment does not necessarily get us to where we want to go tomorrow. And so, I'd like to start with just mindfulness, because I think in this, especially in this post-COVID world, right? Let me just say this too, you're founder of SensoryWorks. We're going to be talking about your other company, Love Deep, and your other company, Busy Bee Therapy. But in this, and so you specialize, let me just say this before I go into it. You're an occupational therapist that specializes with mental health. You create sensory rooms and sensory-based life skills programs to assist those with mental health challenges, SUD, autism, and attention disorders. You also work at many different levels in therapy, offering comprehensive occupational therapy services in school-based settings, and also connecting people just back to themselves. And so I want to really kind of start by talking about, in this COVID world, right? We're living this COVID lifestyle right now. How does someone become more mindful in their space today and get grounded and back to center?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question. And I think mindfulness has been, for me, one of the most, personally, the most transformative tools that I've used. And I've had the blessing of being able to teach it to children, adolescents, and adults for the last 15 years. And it's just an incredible, it is one of the most fabulous, powerful tools, and simplest and challenging all at once, right? Yeah. So how do we practice sitting with ourselves and sitting in equanimity with ourselves, meaning in the present moment, not necessarily willing it to be better or wanting it to be better. Although I would say that in 2020, there's a lot of us that are like, okay, 2021 can come along.
We're ready, right.
But it's really, it's an incredible tool that is available to everyone. And I love it because it's a learnable, teachable, practicable skill. And I have so many clients that are like, oh, I'm terrible at meditating, I can't do it. And I'm like, well, you terrible, what does that even mean? Like, that's part of it, is being able to sit with yourself when you have a busy mind, when you have an anxious mind or an angry mind, and practicing it. And so if you start to look at it as a practice, that changes your relationship with mindfulness.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. I want to dive a little bit deeper into it, because one of the things I love about mindfulness is I'm a big believer in mentors and coaches and in teaching people how to be mindful. But it's, in many cases, it's free, right? So it's because it comes from within, but you need tools in order to figure out how to actually get into that space. And so what are some tools to get into a space where you can actually be mindful?
Yeah, it's a great.
And what does that mean, right? Because I love what you said about not wanting it to be better and being present and accepting what is, right? Because we can't control the past, we can't predict the future. We only have this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's one of the things I love about your work, like about growing a business and being an entrepreneur, but doing it like consciously, right? So doing it in alignment with yourself. And if you don't know what is in alignment with yourself, how do you grow a business in alignment with yourself, right? And one of the ways you find your North Star or your alignment is by sitting with yourself. So to answer your question, I think there's a couple of really powerful tools just off the cuff. One is breath, because breath is present moment. Breath will take you into our body. We as Westerners breathe pretty crappy, like organically, and we have to train ourselves to breathe well. And to breathe, like, it's amazing. Breath itself can be pleasurable, can be really grounding. And so breath, sound is another one that really kind of takes it into the lower part of the brain, gets us out of the spinning thought repetition part of the brain and takes us down into our body. And movement. So breath, sound, and movement, three simple ingredients. It can be all three, it can be one of the three. And my personal practice has both. I have a quiet practice and I have a movement practice, and that's what works for me. But it's been a decade of like fine-tuning that, for myself. And that's what I help my clients to do is if a sitting, let's say, and meditation is just simply one form of mindfulness. There are so many others, but let's say sitting meditation is challenging for you. Well, can you add in active? Can you add in a breath or a mantra? Can you add in a walking meditation? Can you do dishes mindfully if you're really good? So really bringing but it's breath, sound, and movement. And then it's also just awareness, a curiosity about your own inner landscape, you know.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about. I'm very goal oriented. I'm very I always have been, and many decades ago I started doing yoga, and one of the things I realized I loved about it was one of the things I loved about it was you couldn't set a goal. I mean, you could set a goal to do it X amount of times, but your body would only do what it would do. And as I'm sitting here listening to you, it includes breath, it includes sound, it includes movement of all of that. And so when you're teaching people meditation, and I've had a bunch of meditation people on the show, and you're teaching mindfulness, talk about just kind of the minutes and the minutes they need to at least start with, and the moments that are the best moments to actually practice.
Yeah, and I'm a total brain nerd, so I love like my own personal experience and my professional experience, but I like to look at the research, and the research in mindfulness, like coming out of UCLA's Mindfulness Research Institute, for example, has been incredible in the last decade. You can literally change the brain, the neurochemistry in the brain, but even the neuroanatomy in the brain in like a 6-week practice, right? So these were novice people who had no experience with meditation or mindfulness, and in 6 weeks they had noticeable changes to their brain. Like that is so cool to me. Like we're not just coping, we're like literally changing our brain. And so this was a 6-week practice of 10 minutes a day.
So 6-week practice, 10 minutes a day of meditation, right? There's the art of things, there's the science of things. I love art and I love science. I love data to support the art. So, right. So, and I agree with you. I have thoughts, but I love the data that supports it. And so talk a little bit more about that. Like what exactly does the study say happens within these 6 weeks when it comes to consistency and how that compounds and reshapes your brain?
Yeah, and so there's like a lot of research around it decreases negative affect. And so our negative affect, our negative expression, our negative emotion, our outward expression of negativity actually really diminishes. And that negative affect is one of the main contributors to things like depression and anxiety and PTSD. So there's really cool research around that negative affect, around the neurochemistry. But even like I said, the most wild part to me is the changes in the gray matter density, like the changes in the actual anatomy of the brain, by simply learning to breathe well and be present with yourself. And it's one of my favorite things when my clients will be like, I'm terrible at it. And I have to really dive into that with them, because no one's terrible at meditating. You just have described, you've labeled yourself as terrible at meditating. But again, maybe there's something different there. Maybe it's hard for you to carve out time for self-care. Maybe it seems like a luxury. And so again, shifting also into self-care as an impeccable part of your practice, not as like, I'll do that after I do all these other things and grow my business and take care of the kids and all the things, because it will never happen, but actually putting it to the top of the list.
Yeah. I want to talk about some of your other businesses, but I want to talk about real quickly something you just said, which is how do you change somebody's, like we all are responsible for changing our narrative, right? We all have this story kind of we tell ourselves, whether it's about the lineage, what we can, what we can't do, but how do you start changing that narrative to even get into the space where you can open up and begin something new?
Yeah, it's a great question, because we have, Michael Singer talks about our inner roommate. We have our inner roommate that we're hearing all the time.
Michael Singer. I love Michael Singer. Michael Singer is so great. His share a little bit about Michael Singer real quickly.
Oh, I think it's Untethered Soul and Surrender Experiment are two of my favorites.
They're great.
Yeah, and for me, because this is my space, it wasn't even necessarily he had like profoundly new information, but how he describes it, he talks about our inner critic, he calls it an inner roommate, has stuck with me for over a decade. Like I think about, imagine if you had a roommate that's constantly berating you, criticizing you, telling you you're not good enough or you're not going to stick with something. Well, you wouldn't want to live with that roommate, and yet we do. We live with that inner voice. And so your question about how do we change our inner narrative, I mean, awareness, being aware of our inner narrative is absolutely the first step. And then pausing, you have to have stillness to become aware of how you talk to yourself, right? Because if you're busy, you won't hear it. If you're busy with words or busy with life, or you have fall down the like habit of busyness, which I certainly have done, you can't hear how you talk to yourself. So you can't change what you don't know. And so that awareness is absolutely the first step. And then there's so many tools to work with changing the narrative, and visualization is a powerful one, like changing how do you want to talk to yourself. Imagine, right? It's why elite athletes do guided imagery, because the brain can't really tell the difference between something we really deeply visualize and something we've already done. So,
Yeah, I love it. So let's talk about, right? So for these are things that everybody can do. These are things that at times, for somebody that can be very simple. But you also work in a space, and you're an occupational therapist, and you work in the mental health space, and you work with people who have sensory issues, and you're working with people who have challenges and autism. And so for that, for the people that you work with, how are you helping them when it seems like it would be maybe they have an added challenge to actually be mindful and use some of the tools that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, dual diagnosis, right? So mental health and a substance use disorder is one of my main areas I work in, as well as autism spectrum disorders. And by when you have those challenges, those brains really hang out in the limbic system more often. So they're in that fight, flight, fright, freeze, and fawn part of the brain. It is literally the unconscious. It's the non-thinking part of the brain. And just by teaching sensory strategies, so our 8 senses, because we actually have 8, not 5, but our 8 senses, just by where sensory inputs process in the brain and the somatosensory cortex, literally will get that person up into the thinking part of the brain.
Yeah.
And you can't calm that down until you're in the conscious thinking part of the brain, right? It's like why I always tell my staff, I never want to hear you telling someone who's upset to calm down, because they could if they would. They're literally in a different part of the brain, right? It's a good way to get socked in the face telling someone who's upset to calm down, right? It's good for interpersonal relationships too. I recommend not using "say calm down, honey" kind of voice. Yeah. But if we teach our clients to tune into their senses, and that by design, by fabulous design, will get them into the thinking part of the brain, and now we can talk about the emotion, anger, anxiety, sadness, whatever it is. And so that's just an incredible, it is not a magic bullet, but the really underused tool for self-regulation is to use our 8 senses.
Yeah. Yeah. I love, so what are the 8 senses?
Well, we have the 5 that you learned in grade school. So sight, smell, taste, touch, and sound. And
Right.
then you also have the other 3, which are the 3 that I focus on most with my clients, which is vestibular and proprioception, and then interoception.
Yeah.
And those are, for most people, especially, and not a lot of OT specialize in this either. It's a specialty within our field, but it's really cool. And if you watch how kids explore the world, they're exploring with all 8 senses, and then we as adults somewhere along the way stop exploring the world in that way, and yet our brains really still need that input. And so and there's a playfulness to it too. It's like it adds some levity and playfulness to the healing, the wellness process, and I think that is worth its weight in gold, just that alone.
So I love what you're talking about. I mean, and the brain is a muscle that we all need to work on and grow and clear out negativity. And right, the average person has about 80,000 thoughts a day. 80% of those thoughts, this is a study, are negative, and 90+% of them are repeated thoughts day in, day out, day over day. And then you have all the new thoughts of the day. I mean, so your mind can get exhausting. And so how does somebody even tap into the 3 lost senses?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you brought up about all those thoughts and how many of them are repetitive and negative, right? So negative imprints more deeply. So we really have to train our brain to focus on the positive. So things like this awesome science behind a gratitude practice, right? To actually change the brain. There's also, so that changing up what you do, like if you put your right shoe on first, put your left shoe on first, like literally simple brain hacks like that. If you always wash your body before your hair, switch it up, drive a different way to work, if we are driving to work these days, but changing up, because there is so much of our day that's not using new neural networks. And so really, it's in the brain world is use it or lose it. And so creating new patterns, but also using in a conscious way the ones that we have. And so, yeah, changing up our routine, and then doing new things. Like novelty is the spice of life. They say that for a reason. It really does change the brain. So changing up, and when I work with couples right now, couples are spending so much time together, but do something different, like cook a meal together or read a book together, whatever it is, or do a puzzle. I mean, anything that you haven't done before together is fabulous for your brain and for your partnership and for your connection.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Let's talk about work that you do in the school districts, right? You have an arm of your business called Busy Bee Therapy. You're working in school-based settings, and many kids aren't in school. So how have you adapted to that during this COVID era?
It has been a wild ride, I would say.
Yeah.
Many of my 3 businesses, Busy Bees sort of been like the least amount of work. It's a well-oiled machine. We do fabulous work. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden 90% of my time was going towards, taking care of my staff and making sure. So we had to switch to teletherapy rapidly in March, and doing therapy remote, doing therapy on Zoom platforms, or Google Meets or whatever, or Teams. But it was a big shift because my team how was anyone prepared for that? There are teletherapists, and none of my staff is those. And so we had a massive amount of training and searching out and looking for PPP loans and all of the above that business owners can really relate to. But I have to say my staff rose to the occasion because they felt called to, because we have 23 schools of students, anywhere from 10 to 40, 60, 80 kids per school, counting on us for these services as part of their special education plan. And so, gosh, man, my team just rocked it. They were amazing. And now we're all teletherapists. So.
It's wild the way that works. And it happened overnight within 2 weeks, right? The whole world learned how to be therapists, business coaches, everything.
Absolutely.
You do so many cool things, and you have so many you have these 3 extensions of your business that all kind of follow under the umbrella of mindfulness and wellness and personal growth and awareness. And one of the arms of your business, which is Love Deep, helps basically couples, men, women, connect deeply to themselves. And one of the things that I always think is, whether it's in business or in life, is how quickly can you get back to center when things go wrong, and how do you stay in alignment with yourself? And so when you're, I know when I'm annoyed with anybody, it's always my stuff that's just kind of bubbling to the surface. So how do you get people, and again, we talked a lot about meditation and getting back to center, but to connect deeply to yourself, how do you get someone to actually realize it's them?
Yeah, I laugh because it's so easy. Like when I'm working, let's say, with a woman or a man, or they'll be like, well, she doesn't do this, or he doesn't do this, or and I'm always like, great, I listen, full body listening, and
right.
then we turn it back to looking inside, because in a relationship, let's say, it's always a dynamic. But what's your role in the dynamic? Because that's the only thing you can actually change, right? What's your role? What's your contribution? What do you do fabulously, and what do you need a lot of work in? What areas do you need a lot of work in? And so kind of that reframing to look inward, and to also acknowledge it is challenging. It's brave work to do personal development. I would say not everyone on the planet is motivated that way. That's my driving force. I hope I'm growing, learning till the day that I die. But the clients that come to me are wanting to do that work. And so they want that help self-confronting, because self-confrontation is uncomfortable. But I always say we only grow at our edges, and our edges are uncomfortable. We don't grow in our comfort zone. We don't grow professionally. We don't grow personally in our comfort zone.
Right. Well, I love what you're talking about, because it has to do with business and with life. And I always think they cross over, right? So you grow at your edge at work, you grow in your personal life. You grow at your edge in your personal life, you grow at work. And so what is an edge? What is it? They describe to someone who's listening to this an hour later, what an edge feels like for them. Because there's uncomfortable and insecure, and then there's just kind of that beginning step of the edge.
Yeah, totally. And so 2 things about that. I love that question. Never been asked that question. I had the honor of leading a virtual women's group last night, and we talked about, I call it fun comfortable. It's uncomfortable, but there's this excitement. There's this kind of energy of excitement behind it. For example, me hopping on, this is my first live podcast.
Oh, is this?
Yeah, and I was like,
surprised to hear that, Stormy. Yeah.
And I was like, I'm a little nervous and I'm a little excited. And I think it's Brene Brown. I'm not certain on that, but she said, someone I love says that fear is just excitement without breath. Like, can you breathe into it and can you lean into it? So like I did a 10-minute meditation before I hopped out with you to kind of get myself to center and to allow like the butterflies and allow. So it's, they say feel to heal. It's a cliche because it's true. Like you really do need to allow yourself to feel all of it to heal, to work through it. So I'd say your edges, a hint that you're at your edges is this kind of feeling of like, you're a little tentative, right? There's a little maybe breath holding. There's a little bit of tension in the body. Like I wanted to like breathe and move, before I hopped on this call. And then the other thing I would say about that is you want to be sensitive to your edges. You don't want to blow through them. That's just more trauma to yourself, right? And we can do that. Like I'm super fiery. I can blow through any of my edges, but that doesn't serve me. That's self-harm. And so to be sensitive to your edges and be aware of them and know when to like back down or know when to lean in. And that is an art form and it's a practice.
Yeah. I love everything you're talking about, and your work, the space that you're in, you're so passionate about what you do. You're doing such soulful work and connecting with other people's souls and helping them do soulful work, whether it's in business, whether it's in life. I really think they intersect. Whether you're working with people in the mental health arena on any level or the children at school, they're all, you're working with one person, but you're really working with the families behind them as well. Because, anybody who has children or loves somebody wants to see them rise. There's a specialist like you that help, that is really soulful work. And so my question is, how did you find your path?
How did I find my path? So I had a wild path. I started in medicine. I got my doctorate in medicine from Michigan State University. And I was going into medicine. I wanted to be a doctor since I was 5. And psychiatry was what I had chosen to specialize in. And I stopped practicing medicine because my child was struggling with major heart disease. He has a very rare heart condition, and his life was not slated to be particularly long, according to the medical professionals, and I didn't want to miss it. And so as much as I loved being a doctor, I loved being a mom more. That was more in alignment for me. So I stopped my medical training. I took my boards and then stopped. And then his OT, his occupational therapist, changed his life, changed my life. We became good friends. She said, Stormy, you should go back and be an OT. And at the time I said, are you crazy? I just took my medical boards. I'm never going back to school. And then I think 18 months later, I went and got my master's in occupational therapy at University of Southern California, specializing in sensory processing and sensory integration. And then I came out to Utah and started a business working with kids in schools. And then it's just evolved from there, where I realized that the same challenges that I see in autism spectrum, that I see in mental health, that I see in substance use disorders, I also see in people walking around without any of those challenges, in all of us, particularly in 2020, when I just read something that said that they expect that 60% of Americans will be on antidepressants or anti-anxiety meds by the end of the year. That's unheard of. That's just wild. Yeah. And there's such a collective stress right now, and I get it. I totally feel it too. But what else can you do? And I think there is a place for pharmaceuticals, separate conversation, but what else can you do? What additionally maybe can you do to resource for yourself, to find your own sense of safety and resiliency in the state of the world as it currently is?
Yeah. How's your son?
He's amazing. He's like my little walking medical miracle. So yeah, he is my greatest teacher on this earth for sure.
Wow. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been, just as a parent. Yeah. So, well, I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy to hear that he's doing good. So I have a question for you. What do you do? And because I think leaders in business, I think those in whether you're talking to somebody in a business setting or you're talking to somebody that's in front of you in the setting that you're in and the work that you do, sometimes you see people's potential, but they can't get out of their own way. And you see like just this bright light, but they're just squashed down because of their narrative, because of they can't move. And so what do you do to get them on a path of just, it goes back to what we were talking about initially, like raise their awareness and raise their, I don't know if it's courage or confidence or what it is, to get them to see their light?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful question. Yeah, people can be really stuck, right? And we are typically our own worst enemies and critics and all of the above.
Yeah.
I think part of it, as I really like cheerlead for my clients, like I see it in them and I'm a really good cheerleader. And so having that reflected back until you can help them to feel it internally is powerful for sure. And then I think it's also just like allowing in awareness, and then you moving from awareness into like acceptance, compassion, and maybe even love for that part of themselves that gets in their way, because it is a part of them, right? Yeah. In the archetype world, when we're doing shadow work, we're talking about that we typically have 10 to 12 personas that we're working with, and one or two of them is kind of running amok, like the toddler who's temper tantruming, and these are sub and unconscious parts of our psyche that haven't been fully integrated. And so I do a lot of, in Love Deep, we do a lot of shadow work, working with these parts of us, because if we didn't have them, we are all able-bodied, smart, excited people who could obtain all of our goals. So it's the sub and unconscious parts of our psyche that keep us from getting our goals. And so we work with those. We work with those in a really loving, supportive, and provocative way.
Great. I love it. All right, Stormy, you ready for a quick speed round?
Sure, why not?
Right. Best piece of wisdom you ever received?
Best piece of wisdom. I would say it's been more recently in my world, and it's really about finding your North Star. Like, it's like finding what is truly in alignment for me. And mine probably only happened for me in the last few years, and it's changed all of my business. It's changed all my life. It's changed my partnership. It's changed how I parent. But really, what is aligned for me? What is my passion and purpose in life? And building everything from that central focus.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I started my business coaching business almost 6 years ago. It was absolutely, from a business perspective, my North Star. I feel like I've created a business out of being myself. I love it. I've wanted to do it since I was 18. But when I left the real estate world, people thought I was crazy. And so just to kind of comment on that, when you know what your North Star is, the critics, right, they just don't matter, right? It's very Brene Brown. Like, when you're in the arena and people aren't in the arena, they don't understand, and you just gotta, walk your path.
Yeah, and there's ease when you're aligned. It's not that everything's easy, but there's ease. Versus, I found when I was out of alignment, it was like obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. So yeah,
it's amazing how that happens. Favorite book and why?
I'm going to stick with Michael Singer's right now, Untethered Soul, and also Surrender Experiment. For a year, he said yes to everything in his life, even the things he literally didn't want to say yes to. And the book is incredible.
Yeah.
About how it changed his life. It changed his entire path.
Yeah, both great books. I'll when I think of his books, I also think of one of my favorite books, which is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I don't know if you read that one.
I haven't.
That's a great book. It kind of has the same energy, and it talks about why we resist.
Ooh, The War of Art. I'm adding it to my list.
Yeah, you'll love it, Stormy. You'll love it. Define yourself in one word.
Passionate.
And for all the people who graduated college recently into a world that looks completely different, and really the decades to come that will be completely different, one piece of advice for them.
Yeah, I'm gonna stick with the North Star. Like, find what excites you, and if you want to, I love being an entrepreneur, but if you're going to be an entrepreneur, find a niche that is in line with your passion and do that, because that's exactly how you build a business that's in alignment, that you love, or work doesn't always feel like work.
Yeah, I agree. Work should not have to feel like work. If the universe is kind of flowing with you, it should not feel like work. And I just always have to say this too when I comment on that. There are some people who are in jobs that they have to work and they have to put food on the table. But even if you're in that situation, keeping a journal and building something on the side that may take months or years, and keep that alive in you, I think is really, really important.
No, thank you for bringing that too. Like I say that from a place, I am white and I'm from a place of privilege. So I really appreciate that reflection. Absolutely. And I would absolutely also say that, like, exactly like you said, find something that brings you joy and pleasure in life. Like and any pleasure in like good food or the sunshine on your face, but something each day that brings you pleasure.
Yeah, I love that. Stormy, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you, your contact information, and all that other great stuff.
So Love Deep Lab, it's at Love Deep Lab on Instagram and Facebook. And my website is www.lovedeeplab.com. And you can enter your name and email. There's a free ebook on there, newsletters, all the good things. And then my email is stormy@lovedeeplab.com. I would love questions you have.
I love it. Stormy, this has been great. I love talking to you, and I love your insight on mindfulness and meditation, and not only taking that as, you know, something that you believe in, but also backing it up with science and data for those who need it, right? Some don't. I don't necessarily need it, but it's important to have that data behind you. I would love that report. If you could send it to me, I would love to see it. But reminding everybody to take care of themselves and be mindful and be well, and personal growth and raising your awareness, right? We all, especially during this time, I read something by I can't remember who it was by, but it was a published study talking about how Corona runs at a certain like energy and generosity and giving and doing all these things are at a certain high vibration. And right now, we all got to keep our vibration high, our frequency high, and our mindfulness for ourselves, even if it's for 1 minute a day. So I appreciate you kind of shedding light on that, and all the other things that you talked about. And I'm just going to do it. I agree with you. Everybody should be in search for their North Star, both personally and from a business perspective, because life is just easier.
I agree. Thank you so much, John. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, it's been great, Stormy. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Stormy, stay on for a minute when we end. All right. Thanks, everybody.